Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 134 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, and today's episode is on why is it difficult to recognise domestic abuse against men. So this is an absolutely brilliant podcast episode that I really enjoyed, because this is something that I really feel is always missing from the domestic abuse argument, because yes, unfortunately, women are the majority of our cases, and that is absolutely outrageous, and I make that point very clear throughout the podcast episode. But men can also be domestically abused, and no one ever talks about it. And when someone does mention it, they're often laughed off, and silly comments pop up like, haha, real men don't get domestically abused, which is absolutely rubbish. So today's episode is more of a clinical psychology one, because it focuses on mental health and domestic abuse, but also because domestic abuse is also a crime. Well, technically when it comes to men, but not always. But that's something else I will also talk about in today's episode. This also dips into forensic psychology, so this is a really good episode that you're really going to enjoy, and I really enjoyed writing it up, so this will definitely be eye-opening. And it is Friday the 18th of February 2022 as I record this, and if you hear any loud wind noises, thunderstorms, or basically just anything about glass screeching, it's because where I am, there's a red warning about the weather, meaning there's a threat to life. So I have not been out today. And yeah, that and the wind's just awful. So fun times. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're going to be reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. Okay, and the first one is, aha moments give you a ring of truth to completely unrelated statements. Word puzzles are all the rage now, but if you've already done today's Wordle, here are some anagrams to keep you going until tomorrow. Yes, I'm not going to say them. If you manage to solve the anagrams at the end of these statements, you may have experienced a eureka or aha moment in which the solution suddenly seemed to appear, perhaps accompanied by a sense of happiness or relief. And if you did, according to a new study in a scientific report, you'll be more likely to believe that statement itself is true. And then what the article is actually going on about is that if you actually did the anagrams, they wouldn't be correct, and the statements would actually be false. But the entire point of it is that whilst this isn't really that, applicable, but this just goes to show that when we have aha moments, it can actually make us more likely to believe false statements. So interesting. And actually quite concerning when you think about the applications of it, for example, conspiracy theories. And the second one is, psychological interventions focused more on our strengths may improve mood faster than those that focus on weaknesses. Therapeutic interventions such as cognitive behavioural therapy or dialectical behavioural therapy often focus on the development of skills, such as ways to identify and actively challenge particular patterns of thought, feelings or behaviour. Indeed, research into CBT has found that the development of such skills can lead to fewer and less distressing symptoms and a reduced risk of relapse. A new study looks at what happens when these interventions aren't explicitly framed around our strengths or weaknesses. Writing in the Journal of Clinical Psychology, the team from Ohio State University finds that focusing on the skills that our particular strengths can help people recover from sadder moves faster. And this is what is really important about actually doing research, and because psychology should always be evolving, always moving forward. That's why it's really, really important to actually do the research, or more look at what we're doing, do the research, and actually see if we can actually build upon what we're looking at. So for example, because of this new CBT-based therapies, what could happen is that now a new therapy that could actually be developed focusing on strengths over weaknesses. So very, very interesting, and hopefully though something might come out of this in the future, because I think that we should be focusing on our strengths and not necessarily our weaknesses. And the last one is, When we see ourselves as mere mortal animals, creative pursuits may help us to assuage a fear of death. How similar do you think humans are to other animals? The answer might reveal more than you think. According to new research, people who perceive themselves as being more similar to other animals are more likely to care about being a creative and to engage with the arts. Why? It's all to do with how well we manage death anxiety, argue Yuri Hishin at Vickman University Israel and our colleagues in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. So this is actually quite interesting now, because of course, like you would know that I'm like an author, and I do like psychology books, they were like, and also like fiction books. Yeah, that, and I do understand why, because they were like, oh yeah, no, that's my book. So books that were like had the potential to last under common like copyright law between 50 and 70 years after my death. So that is basically almost like an entire lifetime after I die, though. So that's actually quite amazing. But some I know that's what I do now. What can actually last like a long time after I die. And arguably, that could allow me to see like some sort of like legacy after my death. When I die, though, I'm like, that the stuff that I do, and most importantly, the creative stuff that I do, I can actually last a long time after I die. So I definitely think that there is like some truth to it. So very interesting. So now that we've done the psychology news section, so let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been like quite a busy though, because I've been going through tons of like academic papers, and I won't really go into it too much because I think I've already done it in like two different places though. But so you'll be able to like see that at another point. But I do just want to give you a few quick takeaways that from looking at this gamification of autism research. For starters, whenever you do research, psychology students and professionals, please make sure that you do a lot more participants than 10. And it's just like that. We're not so much annoying, but just so maddening that some of these groundbreaking studies, as they call themselves, don't even have that many participants. Like most of them actually have 3 or 4. And it's like, how the hell were you meant to apply the findings of your very, very small study to the entire autistic population, which most of the studies flat out say that they want to do? So it's just something that I do not understand. And also, though, if you can, definitely do a longitudinal study. I can actually see the effects over time. And most importantly, if you can, use a control group. It's like none of these studies actually have a control group to even compare their result to. And then, you've also got on the flip side some studies that actually flat out suggest that autistic individuals don't even need specialised games. It's very quite contradictory, and definitely something that I'm just going to have fun with writing up, because the literature is just so, to be honest, I'm just going to flat out say it, in that the literature is so bad. It's like I'm amazed that journals even want to publish this stuff, because the research is so not rigorous, and it's just strange. I just don't understand it myself. So I guess that in a sense that makes writing up this literature, though, when I finish going through the papers, a bit easy, but it also makes it a bit more difficult because there's not a lot of positive stuff to say. So anyway, though, so fun times ahead. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Forensic Psychology. Right, so this is my second most popular book after Criminal Profiling, and this is a great, really easy to understand book that will really help you understand what forensic psychology actually is, and it really does have the breadth and depth required if you were to have an amazing foundational knowledge, because it touches on so many different areas. For example, like sexual assault, the theories of a crime, how imprisonment works, and how it should actually work according to the research, but then it also goes into criminal interventions, courts, and there's so many other fascinating topics, and this is why I absolutely love forensic psychology. It's such a great area, and this book can really help you get a good understanding of it. So that is Forensic Psychology. available from all major ebook retailers and audiobook retailers, and you can get the large print paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about why is it difficult to recognise domestic violence against men. And as I said earlier though, whenever domestic violence is mentioned, you will never hear about the countless men that are abused as well. And it is outrageous that any man or woman is abused by their partners, and this does need to stop. Flat out, it does need to stop. But whilst there is plenty of research focusing on men assaulting women, there is barely any research on women attacking men. Now, this is extremely harmful to everyone, and this needs to change. But why is it so hard to recognise abuse against men? Even in 2022, where there are so few research studies that focus on men as victims of domestic abuse, and the studies that do tend to focus on homosexual couples, creating and reinforcing the extremely damaging stereotype of an adult straight man cannot be abused by a woman. Of course, this is flat out wrong, but the stereotype exists, and this is what people believe. In addition, then the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence reports that 1 in 9 men experience domestic violence in the USA. But when you consider the damaging impact of the stereotypes, the tendency for men to underreport it, and the so-called accompanying embarrassment, this number is likely to be very low compared to the real number. And the reason why I call this embarrassment so-called is because there shouldn't be any negativity towards male victims. They should be able to get the support and stop the awful things they are experiencing, and the same goes to women. Additionally, whereas male abusers tend to use physical methods to inflict pain upon their victims, women don't necessarily have that option, not only because of their small size and a possible inability to overpower a man, but it also comes back to how women are socialised in our society. Therefore, women abusers tend to use psychological warfare instead by using revenge-seeking behaviour, like posting horrible things on social media and spreading rumours, emotional abuse and stalking. And most experts and people who work with domestic violence survivors actually say this form is more harmful than physical aggression due to it is harder to spot and prove. As well as even more, our legal systems are not designed to effectively deal with the non-physical side of abuse, and again, that goes for both sides, meaning that the psychological abuse is far more likely to continue, go unnoticed, and stop for much longer than any physical abuse would. Personally, I do think this is absolutely tragic, because in our society, we should want to protect everyone, regardless of their gender. So it is a shame that we cannot detect and even legally deal with psychological abuse, and this goes for any gender. All abuse is flat out wrong. Male domestic violence and stereotypes. Nonetheless, when it comes to men being victims of domestic abuse, men don't only feel weak, embarrassed and shame because of the abusive women, but because of the damaging stereotypes too. Men aren't only learning how to deal with the trauma of the partner abuse, they are learning how to survive the societal pressure and stereotypes too though, because clearly, if a man gets abused, he isn't a real man. What utter rubbish. In addition, these stereotypes only increase the self-doubt the victim is already experiencing, and can actually lead to them to put up with it, because they start asking themselves questions like, is the abuse really that bad, and how much damage can a woman do? Again, this isn't helpful, and it is even worse when people around the victim ask this, because it doesn't help them to fight it, deal or survive the trauma. It only makes it worse. Societal expectations and the law. Of course, in this clinical psychology episode, I am not saying that men are the majority of the domestic abuse victims. That unfortunate and outrageous statistic does go to women, but I am highlighting that men are victims too. Also, the very idea of straight men being abused by women was laughable up until recently in research, as well as even in the legal system. Men aren't given the same amount of legal protection against abusers. And this is not good, because surely as a society, we should try to make things equal for everyone. And I am not under any delusion how idealistic that is. But ideally, we should have a society where everyone gets the same amount of legal protection. Of course, as sad as it sounds, I know that will never happen, but we should still try to come as close as we can to it. Additionally, because of the intimate and tight-lipped nature around domestic abuse, all where victims feel alone and isolated in their experiences, like they're trapped forever, and being a man in our culture only adds to this difficulty because of the utter rubbish expectations that we have about men. Like the rubbish about real men that don't talk about their feelings, they don't cry, and they leave the emotional wrecks to the women. And this is why I laugh about it, because you only have to say it out loud and then you know how utter silly it is, and that we really have got to stop these harmful beliefs. And I know that I talk about this like every few months on the podcast, but it honestly makes me laugh because it's just so dark. Okay, also though, it is worth noting that most people, and I was no exception, I just want to be honest there, that a man would be able to stop the abuse, and therefore they don't think about it, nor do they take it too seriously. And this only creates an environment that isn't conducive to supporting men who have been domestically abused. Signs to watch out for. So, as always on this psychology podcast, I do like to mention some useful unofficial tips. Of course, nothing on the podcast is ever official that I set towards the end. Therefore, if you think that you or you suspect a man that you care about might be going through what we've spoken today, here are some signs to watch out for. He is concerned about his partner's reaction to social media, calls or texts from other women. Their partner is extremely jealous and / or possessive. For example, they aren't able to go out with friends alone or allowed other forms of privacy. The partner tells people very personal details about him or their relationships out of spite or malice, basically making fun out of him. Having the partner's friends do the dirty work for them. For example, driving past his house and checking up on him. The partner threatens to kill herself if he doesn't behave in a certain way or do certain things that she asks of him. She brags about trying to get him fired from his job or another form of punishment for leaving the relationship. Conclusion. Domestic abuse should not happen to anyone. I truly, truly believe that, regardless of their gender, sexuality, and or the other outrageous causes of abuse. It shouldn't happen, full stop. But hopefully after today, you can now see that domestic abuse can happen to everyone. And we still have a lot of work to do to help both men and women from being abused. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you actually got something out of it. Personally, I really enjoyed this because as soon as I saw the paper that actually inspired this episode, I just knew that I had to do it, just to help sort of stop some of these harmful myths. So I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please tell them about it. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Forensic Psychology for more information. It's a great book that's available in all the usual places. And if you enjoyed today's episode, but you didn't want to buy a book, then you can also give me a bit of one-time support if you want at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.